And we're live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another virtual DDD. This time with me is Nick, and we're going to do some, and a lot of other people, where we're going to do some techniques for modeling bounded contexts into creation. So, Nick, we've been doing some check-ins, right, with the whole group. And what are we going to do now?
So, to kick things off, I thought it would be good to explain, why this topic, why today, and what's inside this meetup, what we're going to be doing over the next hour, maybe stretching to 2 hours. So it's about strategic design, it's about architecture, and very often when we think about architecture and strategic design, we think about bounded contexts, and we think about boundaries. Like if you want to architect a system, you have to take a large system and you break it down into subsystems. Some people call them microservices, some people call them bounded contexts. Some people say a microservice is a bounded context. I'm sure we have some strong opinions about that. I know there's a few blog posts out there. One recently from Alberto Brandolini, touching on that topic. But what people don't talk about as much is the integration of those subsystems, of your microservices or bounded contexts. Certainly not in the design phase. So people talk about event-driven architecture from a technical perspective, but not so much as a design activity. And if you want to design a loosely coupled architecture, which we all strive to do, there aren't many things we agree on as an industry, but building loosely coupled systems is one of those things that we all strive for, because we know that a loosely coupled system means that we can make changes easily to one part without affecting other parts of the system. That gives teams autonomy. And in order to design that loose coupling, it's not just about finding the right boundaries. It's about identifying how those different subsystems communicate with each other and making specific choices. So we broadly speaking, we have three kinds of message. And I use the word message generically, not to mean a message bus. We have commands, we have queries, and we have events. And then for each of those kinds of messages, you have to decide what's the payload inside that message. And so there are a lot of choices here. The type of message, what's contained in the message, how you name the message, how big is the message. And all of those things can have a big impact on coupling. For example, if you use a command, basically it's one context telling another context, I want you to do something. So the responsibility of deciding what happens next is in the sender. But if you use an event, you're saying, hey, something's happened, and it's up to someone else, another context, to listen to that and decide, I'm going to decide what to do. So broadly speaking, that's kind of stepping on the area of orchestration, which is centralized coordination versus choreography. And so, yeah, how you integrate things has a big impact on coupling. And how do you design the integration? It's not something I see a lot of. It's like I was saying previously, people talk a lot about boundaries, but not so much about the integration. So there are a bunch of tools out there, but none of them have really become standard tools, I would say. There's lots of discussion. There was lots of discussion on one of the GitHub tickets. So we have a simple technique called message flow modeling, which you'll see later. And on the GitHub project for that technique, there was a long conversation about how should you display commands and events flowing through different contexts. There were quite a few opinions on there. And actually, that's how we came to have this meetup, to review the different techniques and to evaluate the trade-offs and to maybe start thinking about giving advice in the future. So shaping best practices. When you're designing a system and you're in situation X, yeah, this technique Y might be most suitable. Like event storming for your boundaries, showing communication between bounded contexts. When would you use that? And when might you not use that? So that's the background to this. One other thing I wanted to mention is that in the meetup description itself, we talked about Vladik Khononov, one of his comments, which he talks a lot about, which is global complexity versus local complexity. So if you're not familiar with these concepts, you probably know what they are, but you might not know how to name them. And the naming is really useful. It gives you a way to express these concepts very easily in conversation. So local complexity is when something in and of itself is very simple. So if you have a microservice and it's 100 lines of code, that microservice is very simple because there's not much code, theoretically. You can do a lot of damage in 100 lines of code. But typically speaking, if you've got a microservice 100 lines of code versus a microservice 10,000 lines of code, the one with 100 lines of code is smaller and is likely to have much less local complexity. And the problem here is if you have small microservices, you have more microservices. And so you have more complexity in how those systems talk to each other, the messages flowing between them. Because now you've got network boundaries, you've got public contracts. So if things live inside the same code base, you can change everything atomically. When you have two separate code bases which are deployed separately, a change to the interface of one would break the other one. So you start getting into backwards compatibility, versioning, etc. So the name here is local versus global complexity. And with the message flow modeling or the bounded context integration, we're looking for the global complexity. What's all the stuff that lives in between bounded contexts and the complexity there? Not necessarily the infrastructure itself, but the communication patterns. So what we're going to do this evening is, for the first part, is we're going to review some existing techniques. I will reveal a section on the Mural Board very shortly. And then after that, we'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll do some hands-on modeling later in groups. So before I get started, I've just spoken for 8 minutes, which felt like an hour. Does anyone else want to add any thoughts on what I talked about? You know, maybe you've had this problem where people have focused on boundaries and not the integrations, and it's been problematic, or maybe you've worked in a team who are very focused on the messaging aspects between bounded context or microservices, and you've got some advice here about things that work well, or maybe the concepts of local versus global complexity resonate with you, or maybe you think it's the model's too simple and there's more local and global aren't sufficient alone. And if you do want to speak up, you can just start speaking. If anyone clashes, we'll manage that as we go along. It's normal for meetups online. Don't worry about that.
There is a question in the chat. I can read it out.
Cool.
So Anthony Davis saying, I'm not sure if it's relevant, but one technique I came across recently was event modeling. Is that something you've explored?
So we do have event modeling on tonight's list of activities. So yes, it is relevant. It is a good suggestion. And it is something that's in this space for sure. What's your favorite technique, Kenny?
No, I was just, so my favorite technique is still event storming.
Okay.
I've tried the others as well. Domain storytelling, for instance, or the version you use of naturally. But one thing that kept in mind where you say what you just said about local versus right between the microservices complexity, and what people sometimes try to do is mimic communication because it's communication, right? And thinking that you can run 100 microservices while your communication between the teams is almost non-existent. Yeah, be careful with that. fix your communication problems. And we were just twittering with Ruth. If you're not following Ruth Malan yet, please do. She has a lot of great insights on this. So there was actually this paper where she recently posted about Conway's law alignment in 1999 about this topic. And it's really interesting that it keeps coming back, right? And we just made a joke. Ruth's law is everything you try to learn or want to learn, she probably has already written about. She has this. And what I'm trying to get is she had this great heuristic that I now coin it the 3C heuristic, which means communication, communication, communication. So if you cannot do communication right between teams or between people, please don't go for less local complexity, but go for more of a monolith architecture, because that will probably fit your company better.
Yeah, I actually have a name for that anti-pattern. I call it organizational dysfunctions mirrored as architectural complexity. Like basically you've got these problems in your organization, and rather than fixing how teams collaborate, you try and solve the problem in code. So one of the examples I have here, Kenny?
No, I was just trying to pitch in there where you say, I recently, someone gave me a metaphor, and it's outside the IT, but they were saying like going towards a microservices microservice architecture while Jape and Dave is constantly talking about look for what's wrong now. Don't think about something new that's fun. It's like having a relationship and thinking that marriage or a child will help your relationship at the moment. Right? That's the same for thinking. Thinking that your organization will do better if you just think, oh, microservices, everyone's doing that, and it sounds fun. No, fun things won't help you there. Neither does that holiday. It's sit down, talk to each other, see what's going wrong now, and start from there.
New heuristic. You can only have a microservice if you've got a child. Like, no, the number of microservices you can have is the number of children you have.
Yeah. So that I was thinking about that metaphor, right? So don't look at that. Don't look at the feature, what you want and what's fun. Same with when your team is not fun. Thinking that you go to a fun day with your group. No, sit down, talk to each other, and go into the conflict. Or like, someone is sitting in the fire. Savas was sitting in the fire. Sit in the fire with your team and battle the conflict.
There's one more question in the chat. Sid is asking whether context mapping helps with global complexity and establishing communication patterns with bounded context.
I can answer that one if you like. So my opinion is that context mapping does help, although I've got some caveats about context mapping, which is most of us don't know how to do it properly. And here's an exclusive scoop for you. If you want to learn how to do context mapping, go to Eric Evans's DDD workshop, and he teaches context mapping via a play. You will play a role in some fictitious company, and you will learn context mapping by actually doing amateur drama in his workshop. So I've been told. I haven't been to it. It's on my wish list.
I've been there. It was great.
You've
3
done
years
it?
ago. 3 years ago, I explored it.
Who were you in the play?
I can't remember. It was so much fun. I still probably have the play lying around here. I need to look it up. But
yes, going back to context mapping, there are a number of patterns in there which do surface global complexity. One of those is the conformist pattern, and being aware of where you're using the conformist can be very useful for a couple of reasons. So a conformist is, I'm going to use the domain model from another system I integrate with because the cost of translating is too high. So I used to work for a company that built marketing automation software, and they were using the Facebook marketing API. And basically in our code base, we used the Facebook model exactly in our code. And then Facebook started changing their API, and our code was coupled to their model. So our code basically had to keep trying to keep up with Facebook's API, but the code was basically a mixture of Facebook API versions 1, 2, 3, plus some custom bits. So with context mapping, you can see where you've got patterns like the conformist, and you can see where you've got chains. So this context conforms to this one, and then another context conforms to that one. So if the first one changes, like you've got a whole chain of contexts, which could all potentially be coupled to each other's contracts and have to change together. So yeah,
it's called a deadlock conformist pattern. I've seen it a lot of times in big enterprises, like a chain of conformists.
Yeah, so I didn't know the name for it, but Michael Plot, he's got some talks on this topic, and he does name some of the patterns. So just to break this conversation, I've unlocked the main section of the Mural Board, and we've got a collection of modeling techniques, which you can see. Next to each technique, you can leave some feedback. So thumbs up, you like it, thumbs down, you don't like something about it. So it's not the technique itself, it's something about the technique. So for the first one, UML, you could say, thumbs up, I like the way it works vertically, okay? And if you've got comments or you're not sure, the third column is kind of, nah, I'm thinking about this, I'm not sure about this. So have a look at all of those techniques, leave as much feedback as you want to, and we'll have a discussion in about, I'll set a timer for like 20 minutes. But we can also, whilst you're doing that, we can still carry on this discussion here.
Yeah, someone, I think.
Yeah, Nick, maybe you can lock the frame and the background so that people don't move it around.
All right. I thought that was locked. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, I'll lock it how it is now.
I think somebody copied it over basically instead of.
Yeah.
All right, let's lock what we've got there now. Should be okay.
So if anyone, so this YouTube stream is live, right? So is anyone watching there? I'm monitoring the YouTube chat. So if you have any comments or, like I said, strong opinions for Nick, let us know in the YouTube chat, and yeah, we'll
all right, I'm gonna
ask it or say it.
I'm gonna quickly put this board in read-only mode just for a minute, and then I'll tidy this section up. I'll lock some stuff. Okay.
Nobody's moving anymore.
Yeah, they're all frozen. That's interesting.
That's
okay, so the board is locked, and what I should have explained is all you need to use here is the post-its sticky note button over here. Select a post-it and try and keep the same size, medium, just like that. So I'll unlock it now, and we can try again. Does that work? Yes, it does.
And
like
now everyone moves again. That's nice.
So what? Sorry, you were saying something, Kenny?
No, I don't know. I was saying to people on YouTube, if they want to ask questions, let us know.
It will be interesting to see if anyone here is from the BPMN world, has got experience with the BPMN choreography and collaboration. I'm very open to BPMN. I haven't used it really. And I don't know if it's a good tool for collaboration. I have my reservations there.
Yeah, I also have my bias there. Just because I saw enterprises go haywire with BPMN. BPMNs can be very well, I think, but you still need to have it mostly think about coupling. That's what I always think.
Yeah,
I think a great one to speak about is Bernd Rucker, right?
Yeah, we had him at DDD London before,
Yeah.
just before lockdown came in, actually. So what he was telling us was there were a few different flavors of BPMN systems. Like one of the styles, and anyone who knows BPMN is probably laughing at me right now thinking this guy knows nothing. But basically what I heard is there were like two styles of BPMN. There's the one style which tries to replace developers and put all of your code inside the BPMN system, which is the ones I've had bad experiences with. It's like, hey, we can replace all the developers with this BPMN tool. And then I said, so how do you test it? And they went, oh, you can write JUnit tests. I'm like, right, you're going to replace all your developers, and who's going to write the JUnit tests? So that was my negative experiences there. But Ben was actually talking about a different kind of BPMN tool where you define your workflow in the tool, but you still have your code inside your separate microservices or whatever. And whenever your microservices complete some step, they call the BPMN system. And so it's kind of visualizing the process without invading your code base in a way. And I think it's becoming the lines between BPMN and message bus, message broker are starting to blur a bit there. So yeah, if anyone does know this topic, please feel free to jump in.
So if you want to hear a story about the conformist pattern, 12 years ago, I was working for a company that already did some microservices, but 80 of these services were translators towards the self-made enterprise service bus with a message broker of IBM MQ.
Wait. Can I just get some clarification here? What do you mean translators?
So it was an ESB pattern with a canonical data model in the middle. So we were integrating several systems. This was 12 years ago. So right now you will laugh at it, but 12, I think it was actually created 15 years ago. So it was ahead of its time back then. We had proper monitoring on it, business monitoring on events. There are proper events on it. The only problem was the canonical data model in between that everyone needed to confirm towards. So what happens when you want to change the canonical data model? You need all these different stakeholders, like 10, to confirm to the new canonical data model.
And Michael Plod's got a name for something like that. He calls it the vetoing consumer, where you've got like multiple consumers who depend on a specific, let's say an open host, for example, or a partnership, maybe it was. I don't know the exact details now. But basically when two of them want something to be changed and the third one says, no, you can't change it for some reason, like those kind of politics. And I would say, absolutely, that is global complexity.
So I've sent the Mural Board now to the YouTube channel because people have a hard time seeing it, just so you know. So afterwards, you need to reset the password or put it on read mode. But now people can join in the fun from YouTube. Yeah, but that was a hard one. We tried we really decoupled the canonical data model and went to bounded context. So decoupling it locally, and that really worked well. Took some time, but.
Do I still need to share my screen? Are you recording my screen or?
Yeah. Keep your screen and we'll be
okay.
Fine.
So I was going to have a quick look through. It seems event modeling is proving to be very popular down here. Zooming out, you can see where people tend to gravitate. It started with UML. UML event storming and event modeling seem to be the three topics. BPMN has been, let's say, ignored for now, but you know, I would say that's reflective of the kind of people who come to this meetup. There's not much overlap with BPMN space, but that doesn't reflect on BPMN itself. So let's have a look at event storming. What do people like about event storming? Right level of information, it's flexible and explicit, it's easy to read, it's very collaborative, yep. It's got a low barrier to entry, works in a group setting, holistic view. What doesn't work about event storming? So it needs a good facilitator. Yeah, sometimes you get a group of people together, you try and do something collaboratively, and it has the potential to, like, event storming is about chaos, right? And you have to manage the chaos. So yeah, sessions do tend to go a bit off track sometimes. So I think that's a valid concern. Needs to be a story. I'd be keen for whoever wrote that, if they want to speak up about that now or later, because I like the story format. For some,
that was me.
That was you.
So what I mean is it requires a user story, as in a user journey story. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, we modeled a adaptive cruise control in a session at the DDD Netherlands with Alberto there, and we had Bruno Thomas there, we had Marijn there, we had Marco there, and I think Alexi was there, and not sure if you were there. Were you there? No, and Paul was there. And we went into groups and people did some modeling on that part, and Alberto took event storming, and he hated me ever since, because a adaptive cruise control is not a story in its total, right? You react on certain events and that's it. It's not like this happens and that's it. So it requires a full user journey to be more viable.
Okay, so something. So when we move on to the modeling later, hands-on modeling, we could do that again. The adaptive cruise control with a different technique if you want to, if you know about that. If you have the instructions that you could share. Let's go have a look at UML. So UML, yeah, I think UML is pretty well known, so I can see why it's got a bit more negatives. So firstly, as an advantage, it's a known concept. Everyone pretty much knows UML sequence diagrams. Yeah, it does capture the important information. It is hard to misinterpret. I'll give you that. Like this UML diagram I've taken here, it's pretty clear what's going on there. It is hard to misinterpret that. I think if you look at event storming, for example, when we have this event here and these two contexts, is this happening in parallel, or does it mean this happens or this happens? So with the flexibility of event storming, yeah, it doesn't always have the full precision. But then,
the question, why does it say query on this green sticky in the event storming picture?
basically this context here is sending a query to this context here.
Oh, but it looks green, so it should be a read model.
So, yeah, that's so I did this. This is how I would do this. But yeah,
so that's the thing with event storming, I guess, right, Nick? What I've said in the past, it's the concept that matters. It's not the name of the sticky. It's more like what does it represent, and if query helps in this case.
But the problem is we build up habits. We associate things, like orange is an event, green is a read model. And so when
but I mean the name you give that concept. So right, event is usually event, but in this case you call the pink one context, while in other you can call it external systems in software design.
Right.
You can call it system in process design, and in your version you call it context. So you adjust the naming according to what you're doing. I think that's powerful. That's the powerful stuff about event storming. You can leave out concepts, or you can rename concepts what works for you in a specific workshop.
Yeah, and I would say EventStorming is more flexible in that respect.
Yeah.
But it just means you have to relearn some of the notation each time and what things mean, which can be confusing.
Yeah.
Whereas
definitely.
the UML sequence diagrams are very clear, but it's less flexible, I would say, because it's a standard.
So did you make it green because it has something to do with the read model, or is it just a coincidence? It's just the query element and it happens to be green.
Yeah, I use green for query and other things. So, and there aren't that many colors to choose from in Miro.
Yeah.
So the read model is kind of the source of the query in a respect. So there is some relationship there.
Ah, okay.
I also call it information.
Okay.
So it's either query, read model, information. For me, it's the same concept. It's information
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in this diagram here, where I put query, is context A querying the read model of the next context, or is the first context on the left updating its read model, which the second context is querying? It's not clear because there isn't a standard notation we've been taught in school and we've learned it forever. Like we're making stuff up as we go along a bit here.
Yeah.
Which is useful. And I think this goes deeper into the concept of Shuhari, the model for learning. Like you start as a beginner, you kind of copy what's there, and then you progress into competent level, and then you become a master, and you stop following the rules and you start applying ad hoc.
Yeah.
I'm like a master in a situation. And I would say that's what's good about EventStorming. It is flexible, that you can adapt it to the problem you're facing. It just takes a long time to get to that stage sometimes. And if you've got people who are in the shoe level and they're still trying to work out what is EventStorming and what does a green thing mean, and they see someone else who's a master using it for something else.
Yeah, it can be confusing.
It can be confusing. So I think that's fair.
Yeah, so I think Alberto's last point is to always abide by the color coding. So there would be a blue in between officially. But I always say the same that you say, Nick. If you think it will be too explicit and it will be common sense, then you just leave concepts out during one of these storms. And that's what you did here.
Yeah, it's like, if I go to France, I have to drive on the other side of the road. But I'm so used to driving on the left side of the road, even though I know I'm supposed to drive on the right-hand side. I've been driving on the left-hand side for almost 20 years. Like it's just a habit there. So if I've been doing EventStorming for a year and I've been associating green with one thing and now it means something else, even if you tell me, like my brain is still like trained to see it as something else. So it's hard to break the association and the habits.
A question from yeah, go on, Yuri, sorry.
Yeah, usually just having the same like board with all the legends for EventStorming helps. And as you mentioned, it is pretty easy to invent new concepts there. So we just tend to have a legend everywhere and every time, and it really helps.
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty important heuristic, what you're just saying, describing, Yuri. And that's not only for EventStorming, but also for if you're just doing whiteboards modeling sessions. Always create a legend because it's better for yourself, but also for people that just joining. They can see, oh, you mean this with that and this with that. So thanks for sharing that. Nick, there's a question from Niket saying, what difference between the simple and advanced domain message flow modeling, thought process wise?
Yeah, so on the simple version here, there are fewer concepts. So typically, one of the ways to keep something simple is to reduce the number of concepts. The fewer concepts there are, less complexity. So with this one, there's basically an actor, a bounded context, a system, and a message. And all messages use the same color. So with this diagram, I don't have to think, is it a command, a query, or an event? I just use this notation. And I can change easily. Like I can change a command to an event on this notation very easily.
So Nick, when would you do that? When would you change that notation?
So the simple version is when you're teaching that, I would say this is where a good, so usually making something simpler is a good way to teach it. Like teaching people to think about a message goes from this context to this context. I don't want to confuse people with commands, queries, or events just yet. Let's just keep it simple and think of everything as a message. So that's when I would do this format. And then you get advanced users who do know this concept well. And they're like, I want it to be clear what's a command and what's an event. I want this to stand out. I can do advanced pattern matching. And my brain just knows when I see an event and it has this relationship to a context and a command, I know that's an anti-pattern. I can just see that. So with this advanced format, we have a separate color for each type of message. And we have a slightly different notation. So with a command, it just lives on the line. But with an event, and this was based on a discussion on the GitHub repo, people said they wanted to see an event separately from a command. So with an event, let's look at the sales context here. The sales context pushes out the order placed, and then it goes to the billing context. Like we're emphasizing that the sales context is pushing it out there, but it's not pushing it to the billing context. It's just pushing it out there. And the billing context is then fetching it. So
who sees it different? I would like to know. So this is Nick. You were looking for other opinions. So who would see it different? Is there anyone?
Yeah. So if you're an expert or you're experienced building messaging systems and you know commands, queries, and events, then you can look at this second diagram here and you can see a lot of blue commands. And that's usually a sign that we normally default towards events. So when you see lots of commands, that's normally a trigger to look deeper. Let me think of some more examples. When you see one context and it's pushing out lots of commands to other contexts, it might be a sign that it's too coupled. It might be a sign that you've got a process manager, which is fine. Or it might be a sign that, hey, because this context is sending commands to lots of other contexts, maybe it's got too many responsibilities in there. Whereas if something publishes publishes 5 events, I wouldn't worry so much about that. If I saw more commands, that would indicate more coupling generally, not as a rule, just as one of those pattern matching things. You think, oh, I need to look deeper there. Like seeing that combination of commands and events, I've not seen that before, or I've seen that pattern before, and it's normally associated with too much coupling. So this version just conveys more information. All right, so the timer's up, but you can keep adding feedback if you like. I'll set a timer for 10 more minutes, and we can just discuss discuss the feedback. So if anyone does want to speak up, feel free to pop a message in chat or just start speaking, and I will continue here. So message flow modeling can be a hard start, but simpler in the end. Yeah, I would say one of the problems going into detail there is with a message flow modeling diagram like this, you have to lay things out for yourself. You're positioning the context and the messages and the arrows to try and make the design clear. Whereas with UML, the layout is automatic. You don't have to think about that. So UML is more structured here. This is a bit more freeform compared to UML. And that can be a bit more complex, but it also gives you more flexibility to highlight certain aspects of the coupling.
So one thing to comment there, because I did that sticky hard start but simpler in the end. Last time I did it, it was you need to get into the concepts a bit longer than, for instance, EventStorming, where you just begin with events, right? That's what I meant. But I think something I always say about the structure versus chaotic, right?
Yeah.
In chaos, we gain insights. If you structure too soon, you will probably lose valuable insights. So that's a heuristic that I always use, is we tend to start seeing patterns if you leave gaps open or if you structure it differently. And just because the UML diagram already structured it for you, it's harder to see patterns for me, or odd patterns. It's just what you see. I see too many commands. Oh, maybe that's an insight. And
yeah,
I don't
exactly.
get that from UML, from the UML model.
Yeah, and also going back to the one we just saw, like maybe even more important than commands is queries. If you see lots of queries, that's like, okay, this architecture is query based. It's all RPC. There's no messages or events here. That's normally the distributed monolith, because you can actually show it. Oh, this query calls this service, and this service queries this service. You've got like a long sequence of chains, and if one of those calls fails, the whole system fails, like the runtime coupling. What I would also say about this one is, I agree with your heuristic. When you're trying to structure something, that challenge you have structuring things is feedback. But also sometimes there's accidental complexity where structuring it adds no value and there's nothing to be gained. It's just time spent.
So there's a question that, let's see, in domain message flow diagram, what is the difference between system and bounded context? Is system something external?
Yeah, so typically a bounded context it's something in our architecture. It's a part of our domain. It's an architectural subsystem. A system is something that's not typically part of the domain. It might be something we build, or it could be external. So in this example, I consider the website, our own company website, as a system. I probably have you could have a separate notation here for application, like mobile app website could be a separate thing. But most of the time it will be an external system. In this example, there's a MailMonkey email service and a Primo Payments payment service.
So then I got a question for you there, Nick.
Yeah.
We'll go to the next question. Because for me, a system and a bounded context means something else, right? They're not mutually, how do you call it? So a bounded context is about a language boundary and a model. And there can be several bounded contexts in a system. Like, for instance, a website can have several bounded contexts if you model it that way. Is that something you already think about here? Right? Do you get where I'm getting to?
Yeah, it's the simplicity versus precision thing again. Basically, a system is anything that's not a bounded context. Now, inside a website, typically I wouldn't consider that to be a bounded context in the DDD sense, but in the general sense, it could be. So for me, a website is the front end, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that receives commands from the user or presents information to the user, doesn't contain any business logic or domain rules. It's just a way to expose the domain.
Cool.
So maybe that would be best to call it system/app.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah. It might even, I was thinking about also making the distinction between what do you own and what is really external.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the similar principles we spoke about before. We've got a couple of principles emerging here. One is the more notation you add, the more complex something is, because there's more things to learn and to understand. But the fewer concepts you had, it might look simpler, but then things become more ambiguous, which we have in this case, where a system's quite ambiguous. So it doesn't always mean that fewer is better. It might mean that having more is simpler.
That's also a good heuristic, I think. That's what I always use with event storming. It's emergent notation, right? Once you need it, just use it. But start simple and expand from there.
And then so I'm seeing three degrees of freedom here. One is about the number of things versus precision. So let's call it simplicity versus precision. Then we've got the other one we spoke about is structure versus flexibility in terms of notation. And the third one we're coming across is it a design tool or a documentation tool? If it's a design tool, then we probably want more flexibility there, because we might be solving novel problems and we don't want to be constrained. But if it's a documentation tool, we might be striving for more consistency there.
Yep. Next question. Is that okay?
Yeah, keep the questions coming.
So in event storming, how would we know to what level shall we keep on going to storm out domain events? EA, when is event storming session to be concluded? As I can have front to end and end to front flow still in place with limited domain events on board.
Yeah, so that's all about thinking about the scope of your session. What would you like to achieve? Firstly, if it's a big picture discovery, then the outcome is a bit blurry. You don't really know where you'll end up sometimes. However, if your goal is to model your bounded contexts, then there are certain outcomes you can aim for. So I'm going to move over here to what happened to I think we lost the check-in space. Oh, no, we didn't. I lost myself. So the outcome of your workshop might be, let's try and create a bounded context or one bounded context. Let's create a bounded context canvas or one bounded context. And the goal is, let's find all of the commands, queries, and events related to this bounded context that come in or that go out. That could be the scope of your workshop. Or it might be, we've got 4 bounded contexts. Let's try and create a canvas for 4 of them. And from that perspective, I would design the workshop to achieve those things. So what would I need from the workshop to achieve those outcomes? What information would I need beforehand to achieve those things? So it might be that we've already had an event storming workshop. We've identified our bounded context boundaries, and that's our starting point. In that case, we can create a notation for this workshop. So the notation would be, we need some symbol for a bounded context. We need some symbol for a command and some symbol for a query, like we've got here. Like we just need these 4 bits of notation. And then we think of the use cases. So what does this bounded context have to do? It might be, accept payments, reject payments, allow the user to create a new credit card, and then you just model those flows. And you're looking for every command, query, or event that goes in or comes out of the bounded context. And that's the level of detail you stay at. But sometimes you might need to go into more detail. Like you might decide, I'm not sure if this should be an event or a command here. We just don't know. What we're going to have to do is actually start modeling the internals of the bounded context. Like we might have a process manager. We might think we need a process manager, but before we can design the interface, it might be good to design how it works inside first. So then you have to adapt the level of detail you work at. So it's like we were saying earlier, when you first get started, you have a specific notation you follow and you have little flexibility. But then when you become more advanced with the tools, you're adapting as you go along. Like what level of detail, what notation should we use? And it's less predictable from that respect. So feel free to ask any more questions about that. I think it's a great topic. I think that's what I find most exciting about this. When you get to the advanced level and you have to be more creative and you have to like bend the tools rather than following the prescribed recipes.
And that's, Don said it last time, it goes back to the Shuhari. When you're in chaos, so you don't know. So when you're in novelty, just follow the process. And Casper started that DDD process thing on the DDD crew, right? And it reminds me of that people getting into the DDD space, just follow that process. And because you're novel, if you're something novel, I've done Aikido, which is Japanese martial art. It's the same. It's might be boring at start, but just follow the process. And eventually when you get, and they have explicit levels, right? Like at some point you get to a done level and then you're the re. So up until then, just follow the process. And at some point you start feeling, maybe I need to do something different here. Are we still within the principles? Yes. Okay, now we do it. But in novelty and in chaos, just follow that process.
Yeah, so I would say if you're not sure where to start, then the first thing is clarify your outcome for the workshop. So try and have a focus on what you'd like to achieve. And then whoever's facilitating the workshop, their responsibility is to keep the group moving towards that goal. And if things go off topic, you need to bring things back on topic sometimes. But the problem is sometimes things go off topic for a valid reason and you discover new things. And that's the more advanced level where it's like, okay, let's go off topic for a bit because it might be productive. So yeah, if you're a beginner, I would say have a focus of what you'd like to achieve and just stay on topic. And if you do go off topic or you feel like you want to go off topic, just put a note to come back later and try and get to the outcome first. All right, I'm going to go check in on the BPM tools. So we did get a bit of feedback. So someone says Activity is a good tool. I haven't used Activity. If anyone has used Activity, I'd like to hear about it. So maybe some other people here would too. Looks formal. Looks like you need to create an enterprise architect to create one. I think that's a reasonable observation. It's not about whether something's true or false. It's about how is something perceived. And I perceive BPMN tools in a similar way. And I'm always looking to try and challenge my opinions, because one of the things I learned from Simon Wardley and his Wardley mapping concept is that every evolution goes through stages. And even if the current version of evolution isn't working for you, there might be an evolution of that comes along and changes the constraints or changes the pros and cons of that tool. And the new version is useful and is beneficial. So I'm always thinking, look, there are so many people who use BPMN. There's got to be something useful there. It can't be just a complete waste of time. There's got to be something useful there. There are some smart people working in that space. And they're not standing still, are they? They're constantly innovating. So who knows? Like one day, the BPMN community, they might invent something better than EventStorming. So I'm always open to seeing what could happen there, like always keeping my mind open. And maybe now that we're all working remotely, maybe some of the BPMN tools are more suitable.
So there's another question from Mosen saying, is it okay to model every single scenario that need to be implemented at design level event storming? So I can take that one if you want. So for software design level, software design level is to be, right? It's what we want the system to behave once we created it. So there's this in Alberto's book, you'll see that thing, and I think I also put it on the DDD crew site, where you first always first rush, well, not rush, the happy path. So finish your story. Nobody likes a unfinished story. That's George. That's something to George R.R. Martin, right? We want that finished story. So first do that. And whenever you feel like you're jumping in, like I'm a developer, so we want to jump into if then else's, right? Cases, we look in cases. You just hotspot them. You hotspot, there's more to discover here. You finish the happy flow path. You make sure that's nice and neatly abide by the color coding. And then you just explore the most prioritized use cases and you go deeper. So it will be top to bottom thing. Hope that answers a bit your question. I'm looking now for the, let's see if I can quickly pick up that picture, show it. No, I don't think so. So does that answer your question, Mosen? Hopefully. So Nick, how would you remodel integration between two external systems? A question from Asit. I need to zoom in. The chat of Zoom is like really small. I'm not sure if you have the same problem. So we can pick up the continue it. Are you still there, Nick?
Yeah, I just went to turn my light on.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so how would we model integration between two external systems?
Integration between two external systems. So if both systems are external and they're communicating with each other, that seems like it's outside of my responsibility. I'm trying to think about a situation where I've had that scenario before. I'm trying to work out. Yeah, so I think I've had this before where you get data from another system and it's useful to know where they get the data from. There's like a chain. I would say depends on what we're trying to gain from that. If it's from a relationship perspective in terms of the contracts, then I think context mapping is a good tool there. If we want to know what's the messages and what are the payloads and the conversations between those two services, then context mapping is not so good there. Context mapping is about the structure. Like this thing is connected to this thing and they have this relationship. The tools we've got here on the Mural board, I'd be probably picking one of these. So my thinking on this topic is, if I want to model a long sequence of interactions, then I would use EventStorming or something with swim lanes like story storming or maybe event modeling. If I had a very simple scenario and I wanted to document it on an A4 piece of paper, I would use the message flow modeling. So when the scope is small, I prefer message flow modeling because I can just see the relationships easier. When the sequence of interactions is longer. So I always say when you're doing message flow modeling, if you've got more than 7 messages on the diagram, you've got too much going on there, make smaller diagrams. If you want something bigger, then I would go with event storming or event modeling in that case. So yeah, it will be one of those tools, basically. Am I looking at the structural relationship and the organizational aspects, or am I looking at the conversations, the messages flowing backwards and forwards, and the payloads? That would help me to choose which technique there. So I'm going to quickly go over event modeling now, discuss the feedback here, and then we can take like a 15-minute break, and then we can come back and do some hands-on modeling. So EventStorming is a nice to read model. So if we look across here, what stands out to me here? I can see these swim lanes down here. I guess these are my actors or my services. So yeah, that's pretty clear. EventStorming uses the same colors for commands, queries, and events. So as someone who's used that notation before, I can adapt to this easier because I know it, because the standard's there. It does look a bit complex to me, though. I don't understand all of it at first glance. I guess you need to learn all of these techniques. And I think someone said it down here. Yeah, it looks a bit complex to start, which I think is a fair. There's quite a few different kinds of concepts here, like we talked about before. There's the swim lanes, there's the arrows, there's the line here, the bits at the top. It's not a huge amount, but when you first look at this, it can be a bit in your face, daunting until you learn it. So I think both of those comments are fair. I think this one here is good. I'd never thought about this. So EventStorming shows the UI, but we care about UX. So I always think it's good to think about the UI when you're designing the back-end systems, like how will the boundaries in the architecture and the communications affect the UI? But what the point here is, well, UI is not UX. Are we coupling the back end to the UI when the UI might change frequently, or the UX and the back end might be designed separately? So I think that made me think, actually, that this one here made me think a lot. And so, yeah, up here includes the UI, which we often do forget, which I like about event modeling. It's detailed enough to drive development, which I think is useful. So going back to the question from earlier, how do you decide what the scope is? When do you start? When do you stop? If your goal is to actually start developing after the session, maybe you want something like event modeling, which is much closer to the implementation. All context in one model. Yeah, I think this is useful. When we think about the messages flowing between bounded contexts, people often have like commands, events, and queries, which is important, but they don't show the payload on those messages. And when you start thinking about the payload, like which information needs to be on this message, then you realize, oh, the context sending this message doesn't actually have that piece of data to put on the message, and it forces you to reevaluate the design, whereas event modeling makes you think about the data that's being transferred around. Someone says here it's a good mixture, which I think is fair. Someone here says in combination with EventStorming, which I think is also fair. Someone here says it takes assumptions to go to CQRS ES. I don't have a lot of experience doing that, so if anyone wants to speak up.
Yeah, it does. Adam speaks quite often that everything should be CQRS and ES, and everything by nature is eventually consistent and everything. I mean, he speaks a lot about this. So I think it's a fair point. I'm not the one that I wrote that, by the way. I'm just saying that it's a fair point. Okay, so we know it was you now. Shall I put your name on this one? I didn't write that one. I wrote the one directly on the left of that, to be honest. But I'm just saying it's a fair point. As I said, Adam makes a lot of very regularly mentions this. Yeah. Yep. I think there are, so the one to the left here and this one over here. So I've not used event modeling, but it looks to me like some of the patterns you can do in EventStorming around collaboration don't fit here. So with EventStorming, you can show parallel processes. I don't know how you would do that here. It looks like you've only got one
one conversation happening here. It's one sequential step of events.
Yeah, I wrote both of those stickies, by the way. So the reason I mentioned that it's not very collaborative is because, I mean, it's what I write below. It lacks that brainstorming ability. It's too structured to facilitate that aspect of putting on ideas and then deciding to try something different and then dropping it down, which EventStorming really helps and facilitates. So it's from my experience, I would say it's really good for the requirement extraction in a more structured way, but not really helpful with brainstorming itself. And the aspect with some workflows don't fill the available patterns is that event modeling has certain patterns with regards to how messages flow happens. And there are a couple of cases where this is not exactly, this doesn't exactly fit, especially when you have longer running processes driven by events without necessarily having to stick them in views first. Anyway, just some cases where it doesn't strictly fit the available patterns.
Yeah, and something you were saying there about structure goes back to what we talked about earlier, where we were comparing the flexibility of EventStorming with the structure of UML and the pros and cons there. If we look at event modeling, it's kind of in between the two.
Yeah, yeah.
It's got a bit less structure than UML, but a bit more structure than EventStorming. With UML, I feel like I can see exactly what's happening between two services. Like this goes from here to here, it's very clear. But looking at this one, it's not always clear to me which event's going where, but maybe I need to learn this more.
I mean, this is supposed to be, as you see, the time flows from left to right as well. So you're supposed, I think you do get that piece of information. You don't get lifetime scopes in event modeling, but you do get that flow and sequence of things quite nicely, in my opinion. So that exists, and it does have that similarity. I think from my perspective, I do agree perfectly with your assessment that it sits somewhere in between. Yeah. We'll try it a couple of times. Maybe someone else, I don't know, can voice some opinions.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, because there's a lot of on the upside. And is there anyone wish to speak out on the upper side? I'd really like to hear those.
By the way, it's just started raining here very heavily.
Now I need to check my...
Maybe you can send some of the rain to us.
So what
Keeping it.
interesting thing, Nick, is what I'm thinking about is about the flow and everything. And Dawn is now currently writing about Service Blueprint. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah, there's a Miro template for that too. Shall I import one into here now?
I've put a picture on the right side. I'll put it on the bottom side. So it reminded me a bit about this, but this is a lot nicer structure. It doesn't hold the bounded context in, of course, because there's a line of visibility, which reminded me of a bit of Wortley, right? The visibility, perhaps, but perhaps here you can also add in a line with the bounded contexts, right? That was just popping in my mind now, looking at that.
Yeah, so with the bounded context, it's a bit closer to the implementation. I think the service blueprint, looking at this for the first time, looks a bit more high level.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if anyone ever done that, because that was just an experimentation I thought of doing.
And it looks like this refers to a service as an end-to-end service, not a technical service.
No.
Let's say a service for shopping online. This looks like it involves multiple bounded contexts, like maybe each one of these page actions here
And I think there it goes wrong, right? Because I think these the people call service designers, and it's more of a user service designer, and a bounded context is an implementation detail, while this is more of a reality, like the problem side, right?
Yeah, this is probably something more on the enterprise strategic level, product level, portfolio level. Yeah.
But you should be able to drill down, I guess. Perhaps.
Yeah, I think it will be great to have a meetup on this topic. Looking at this service blueprint now, it might be a way to connect the two different worlds of domain-driven design plus service design. So if you can
it's the same, I think. Yeah, it's the same. I think Susanne Kaiser did at DDD Europe last year with Wortley mapping towards bounded context and serverless design. That was really a nice talk.
Yeah, her talk was great. A lot of information packed into that talk. I was looking forward to watching the talk, but I don't think it's been published yet. Like rewatching it, basically.
I've seen the slides, so it gives me some information. Let's see if we have more. Do we want to take a break, Nick, or ask a few more questions? So
let's say I'll set a timer for 15 minutes, and then we'll do the hands-on modeling after this break. But anyone who doesn't want to take a break and wants to stay here, we can carry on discussing things. Yep. And then we'll split into the breakup groups in 15 minutes.
So let's see a couple of more questions, right? Continue to EventStorming questions and your inputs. We have started the workshop recently. Decently put up board, gives good picture of business flow, but still looks immature for next level to be able to define boundary context. So noted point of define a goal of workshop. Yeah, about that, about the goal is a template I usually use. And it's something out of the book of David Sibbett, Visual Meetings. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that. But let me put it.
Can you post this template you use onto the Mural board?
Yeah, I'm trying. I was trying to copy paste it, but yeah, we should go.
Oh wow, we've got a thunderstorm now. Did you want one of those, or did you just want the rain?
Yeah, no, thunderstorm is also fine. So he uses this template in his book, and it's called Visual Meetings. Let me.
Can you hear that? Can you hear it?
No, a bit.
Wow, my house just vibrated. My whole house just shook from the thunder. Ah, what's this?
So this is from this book. So here it says, and this is what we usually do in workshops nowadays. We define a rough agenda. Then we have some roles, right? Who's the facilitator? We put up some rules. We add the rules with the people, right? I usually have one rule. My main rule is always everyone's right and nobody has the monopoly to the truth. That's my core rule, right? That means it's just perceptions, and we're trying to. And the second one following up there is it's okay to change your mind based on other people's perception, right? And then the outcomes that's what triggered me, right? You want to define the outcomes. What are we doing today? And this helps people in the chaos of a group structure. So another one was, is David still here? Yeah. So does which tool is appropriately evolve the relationship with the client progresses? From first discussion of functionality to illicitly requirements for the first time to cycle of adding functionality. I do not have a sense of when to use Wortley mapping and when to use EventStorming. I'm thinking of eliciting events, then Wortley mapping, and then drill down with more EventStorming for details on most immediate work. Well, it's something you also talked about, and I think Casper in the DDD crew talked about, right? Want to share something there, Nick or Casper? I can share as well.
Sure. I've got some thoughts here. Firstly, I would say there is no perfect starting point you could start with either of those tools, and both tools will give you insights and probably make you more productive when you use the next one. I think what would be the heuristics I would use, or what would be the characteristics I'm looking for about choosing each technique? So sometimes it's useful to talk about the business strategy first. Like, what are the goals of the company? Where are we looking to go as a company? And investing in an event storming workshop, getting a bunch of people together, modeling things collaboratively, that can be a big leap for some companies. It can be a lot of effort, a lot of buy-in, taking a lot of time out of people's calendars. And it might be too big a step sometimes. Whereas tools like Wardley mapping or the business model canvas, you can start mapping out the high level of their business, just the main concepts, like how do you make money? What are your key services? What services do you depend on? And you can start having conversations about what are your priorities right now? How is your landscape evolving? What's your focus for the future? And then if those sessions go well and people feel like you've understood their company and you've provided some insight and value, people might be happy to jump into an event storming session and commit more time and effort to exploring the space and looking for possibilities. A lot of companies have heard of event storming now. They know it's a proven technique and they're very keen to try it. And the outcome of an event storming session might be, we've got lots of opportunities here, lots of problems. How do we decide which ones to focus on as a company? And that can happen in event storming, right? You uncover lots of problems and everyone feels like their problems are the most important. You've got years of legacy debts, years of legacy and organizational debts. And there's a lot of problems in the company, like where do we start? And that's where Wardley mapping is useful. It's a way to step back and look at their priorities. Where does the company want to go? How does it want to develop its business capabilities from where it is now to some future target? And an event storming is very detailed with lots of information, and you want to condense that into something shorter where you can focus on like business level initiatives and capabilities. So in summary, you can do either technique first. It depends on a couple of things. Do you want to get the details first, or do you want to think strategically first?
I have a question there. Sorry, Kenny.
No, go on.
I mean, I'm first of all, I've been working permanent to all companies like for a long time now. But one thing that I've seen, at least in the companies I've worked with, when we did event storming and even before that, is that there is definitely a lot of disalignment between the different departments. And each case where we actually tried to do big picture event storming, at least, I personally not very surprised, but the consistent picture is that always people left that session with like they were actually saying that this was really useful because they finally understand what everybody else is doing and they understand the bigger picture more than just the mission statement or whatever the CEO shared globally. And this is really useful for everyone. I mean, it facilitates discussion more than anything that I've ever personally at least seen. So the question is that's a comment. And then the question that I wanted to ask is really if how does that exactly fit? I mean, I can see the benefits with Wardley mapping, but if you don't have that alignment, how does Wardley mapping help? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be. I'm honestly trying to understand.
Yeah. So I can pitch in there. So for me, my main heuristic is if I can do a big picture event storming. So I mean, big picture, whole domain, or depending on how big your size is, I will always go for the big picture event storming. Downside, you need a lot of people having to lock their agenda for 8 hours on the same day. Well, there's already one thing. If an organization cannot do that, that's already a smell, right? That's what you just said. Yeah. Probably it might be a dysfunctional one, but if I want to pick, I will always go for a big picture event storming to know what is there now, what knowledge is there. And from there, I can start distilling a context map or a Wordly map or a business model canvas, because then I know what's there, and then I can then later on decide, okay, and there's a nice talk about at Explore DDD first year by Javier, using the the business model canvas to be filled in by the developers and by the CTO, and then match them, right? Look, oh, there's a difference here. I didn't know we had that service. The CTO said, oh, now we have a new service. So I always would pick going big picture event storming with the people who build stuff. Saying that, it's a lot of effort, and sometimes managers don't have that time, or C-level people don't have that time. So I'll just start to do a Wordly map with them, and then start to go to other people. Same thing you would do with a context map. Start doing that with one person or two people in a room. Do that, and then go to other people. The goal of a Wordly map is the mapping, is the practice of mapping. It's not the map itself. So it's the conversations you're having. So if I capture a Wordly map conversation with one person, I can do it with another person and capture that as well and gain new insights, and thus doing it a bit more asynchronous. And at some point you'll start feeling the pain that maybe we need to sit together in one room and figure this stuff out together, and then do it together. So that's what you said, Nick. It doesn't matter which approach you take.
Oh, no, I think it can matter, but sometimes
it can, but it depends on the context.
It depends on the context, and I think there are two things to keep in mind here. Like, from a general perspective, we always have this choice of top down or bottom up ways of approaching a problem, and since it's a problem space we don't have the solutions for, with many unknowns, we don't know which approach is best. So we use heuristics to work out which technique. And then, so in any situation, either of those approaches could be the best first step in an ideal world. And then there are the constraints we face, which may make the ideal solution not possible anyway, like Kenny was talking about. And the second thing is, both of those tools work at different levels of abstraction. Like, you can Wordly map your entire company or one department or just your IT system, and not some of the other business parts. Kind of same with event storming. Like, even big picture can mean big picture or just quite big picture.
So that's always the first question that people ask. Yeah, but how big is big? Who do we invite? And I said, well, we'll try to invite as many as possible, but a good capability model, for instance, would already help. Then we can pick already a slice out of that system.
I think the heuristics for me would be, which of those techniques is going to deliver something useful immediately and gain buy-in to spend more time discovering. So if my feeling is there are too many dysfunctions here, event storming won't work to start with, then that might lead me towards Wordly mapping, for example, or it might lead me towards a smaller scope of big picture event storming and doing multiple of those sessions. If I look at a company and I think, like, if I Wordly map it myself and I think, hey, there are some obvious things going on in this company's domain, a Wordly map is a very quick way to make them clear, then I would go Wordly mapping first. So yeah, each of the tools could be a good first step.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really useful. Thanks.
Now, another question from Rinat is, did we consider, Rinat is still here, I hope, did we consider using user story mapping technique? It's not strictly message oriented though. Rinat, there you are. Maybe you can ask the question yourself.
Yeah, so I know that hi Nick, hi Kenny. So yeah, the user story mapping is the technique that is, well, it helps to structure the backlog, as well as I think it's covered close to what you would have in the UX customer journey maps. The one thing that I have, like one problem that I have is with using EventStorming, that they tend to be, let's say, on the backend side or API side, so to speak. If you go through technology, if you apply it to technology if you use it as for technology implementations, but once you kind of start talking to the UX guys, it's you do not get that many of the communications. So user story mapping allows us kind of to create the scenarios and look through them, but it lacks the messaging aspect of all other techniques that we presented here. So did we consider it? What kind of positives, negatives we have about this particular approach?
I think this is one of Kenny's favorite topics. Kenny's always talking about blind spots, blind spots, blind spots, blind spots.
Yeah.
He's talking about rain a lot today, but when he's not talking about rain, he's talking about
still no rain. Still no rain.
Okay.
And
yeah, so for me, user story mapping, and Alberto said it as well, I believe is a pretty interesting technique, especially to go to a pretty well-defined backlog. The only thing I dislike is the focus on commands, so tasks instead of events. But it's scoped, right? It's usually scoped for a project. So for me, I would still prefer to use EventStorming also for the user perspective, because you can model that in. I can just remove, for instance, events if they would like to talk more about commands. But I can bring in the user journey in the journey of a event storm. So I would still prefer the flexibility of EventStorming and get the whole picture straight in an event storm, from user journey to, and you might put them on top of each other, right? So you put the top one, you do then the user journey, and on the bottom side you do the business journey, sort of say. Okay. That's how I approach it. But I don't think user story mapping would work because it looks more of a problem space and not yet in the solution space. So it looks of what's the problem of a user, what's the user story. So that's still problem space. And then the way you implement that in a user story map, then you need something like example mapping, event storming, or any other technique you wish to go towards the solution space or going inside the solution space. Yeah.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good.
All right, sorry for that. Should we take a quick vote to see who wants to do hands-on modeling versus continuing the discussion? I think we've got about 40 minutes left, which is just enough time, but it seems like there's a lot of, do we have many questions left still?
Yeah, there's some comment, or it's a question. There's 3 questions, I see. 2 questions. The one is about leaving, so 2 questions left. So shall we do a vote? So is that, sometimes it shows the hands and sometimes not, right? Oh, there's the reaction. So thumbs up for continuing the conversation then. It's on the bottom, you see reactions, and just do a thumbs up to continue the conversation, and a clap for doing modeling. So I see now 6 for modeling and 7, 8. I think most people are for the modeling, Nick.
All right, cool.
So let's do that.
Yeah, I guess we can do both. So I'll create some spaces on the Mural board, And then if the people who want to do modeling can put their hands back up, we'll put you into breakout groups.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can, you need to do it on the right side, right? Where there's more, and then put your hands up. So I see one person putting their hands up for the modeling space. So do it in the chat, you can put your hands up. So if you put your hands up, I'll throw you in a group to do modeling. And then we might stay here and continue to.
Or we could do some mob modeling. We could just try doing it as a mob, doing everything by votes.
Yeah, because I still see only one person put their hands up on the chat. So.
All right, let's do the questions, and then let's do some mob modeling.
So I see 3 people now with their hands up. Mob modeling sounds needs too.
I'd be okay with modeling too.
Okay, let's do that then.
All right, so let's do mob modeling, then we'll come back to the questions in, say, half an hour.
Yeah.
So Kenny,
we'll finish around past, right?
Sounds good. So Kenny, you had a domain you were talking about before. Would you like to be the domain expert?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things about a car.
All right, so I'll be the facilitator or the driver for the first 5 minutes, and then we'll switch. So tell me about this domain. What's this domain called?
So it's the adaptive cruise control for a car.
Adaptive cruise control for a car. Okay.
Yeah. So you have self-driving cars from Tesla now, of course, but before that, I've been writing this for 3 years, a adaptive cruise control car. So what it mostly does is there's a few functions. So it looks in front and just mimics the speed of the person in front. So you put it on like cruise control saying, okay, I want to drive 100 kilometers an hour. And then it just drives. And as soon as there's a car in front, it will stay on a safe distance and adapt to the cruising of the person in front. So that's the main functionality. So there's more, but that's the main one.
What would we like to model here? Let's think about the scope. Are we modeling a short, simple transaction, or would we like to model a longer flow? What do you think? What's the scope from your perspective? We're modeling the whole thing.
Well, there are several actions a user can take, right? There's several actions that can happen and that we need to take in account for.
Okay. So
I don't think it's a full, I can explain the journey and maybe we can map that out and then dissect these specific functions.
Okay, yeah.
See what we can do.
Let's map the user journey with just post-its to start with. Let's get the user journey straight. So can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
So what's the first thing? What's this scenario we're modeling here?
So the first scenarios is setting the cruise control.
Setting the cruise control, perfect.
I don't like setting, but yeah.
Okay. We'll put stars around that. Maybe we can find a better name.
Still need to think about the word setting because I don't like technical terms in my domain.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what's the first thing the user does?
The first thing is
who is the user? Tell me a bit about the user.
The user is the driver of a car.
Anything more specific about this user that you can tell us? Is it a driver of any car? Is it a particular demographic or particular customer segment or luxury car or?
No, it's so the early ones so let's take a cruise control car because that's the most fun to want.
Yeah.
Right. So let's take a electric vehicle car driver.
Electric
but
vehicle.
it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't need to be in the higher segments though, because the higher segment is a Tesla, which is a self-driving car. So it's the mid to low range cars drivers.
Is this a commercial driver or a business?
Not commercial driver.
Like sorry, leisure. Is it like a leisure part?
Yeah. Yeah. Commuting or.
Yeah. Okay. Commuting. Great. So the first thing they do is.
So the first thing would be to set the speed of the cruise control. So the speed of the cruise control. How do you say that English word?
Cruise control speed set.
Yeah, set.
That sounds okay for now. We can fix it later.
Yeah.
And then depending on the current speed of the car, let's go for the happy scenario that there's no other car around. It will adjust the speed of the car to the set speed of the cruise control. So I'm going to put a placeholder here, other cars around. We'll come back to that later. And the happy path is, so in this first one, cruise control speed sets. And in this one,
this one is the car speed.
Car speed adjusted to cruise control, were you saying?
Yeah, to cruise control speed.
Okay, so my time mobbing is up. We'll pick another person next. But let's just have a very quick retrospective. So I think this is going in the right direction. Let's think about the user journey before the bounded contexts. But my concern is all the people who are not driving or facilitator or the domain expert, what are they supposed to be doing right now? Can they do anything, or is it just passive watching? So I have a proposal, which is if you're watching, you're allowed to raise a question using this green one. So yeah, if you're not the driver or the domain expert, you can put one of these green stickers up as a question. And then when the session finishes, we'll review the questions. How does that sound?
Yeah.
All right, so now we need to select a new driver. My time is over. Any volunteers?
There were a few, right, who wanted to do. So anyone who wants to volunteer? If you can unmute yourself and start talking if you want.
How about you, Savas? You feel a bit of driving, bit of mobbing?
Sorry, I don't think I don't know actually. I think I need to drop off, to be honest.
Okay, no worries.
I'll try to stick around. I don't know, but I don't think I can drive now. Sorry.
No problem. So maybe we'll just continue then, Nick, or not?
Okay, I'll do another 5 minutes, and then if anyone wants to take over, just put a message in chat, and you can take over. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So don't forget, if you're watching, you can add questions. So the car itself has adjusted to the cruise control speed. And what happens next?
Well, that's the happy scenario, and eventually you'll just you'll end up braking. So you press the brake, or you lose the cruise control set, and then you've ended. So either you brake, and then the cruise control will get off, or you put it off yourself manually.
Okay, so we've got two scenarios here, which is...
Yeah, two things can happen at this point, but maybe that's the end. And then we might go into the next scenario, and that's the third event that can happen. There's actually 4 things that can happen now.
So the driver can brake.
Yeah, you can manually end cruise control. So the user ended the cruise control.
The user ended cruise control. Cool. And there was another one you were saying?
Yeah, so this will just end the cruise control thing, right? And there's an emergency brake function that will end the ride as well. So that's an easy one. And there's a third one.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start spreading these out. What do you think about this? So emergency brake activated.
Yeah, that will just end that will just end it as well. There's a few scenarios now that will move into a next scenario at this point.
Okay. Which one of these is the main flow from here? Do you feel like any one of these is?
No, this will end the flow. So there's the fourth one is a car detected in front.
Okay. So these are the 4 possible things that can happen here.
There are multiple. There's another
the car detected in front. Is that this one here? Are the cars around, or?
Yeah, that's that one. So, but it's mostly in front.
Okay.
So someone in YouTube, Jimmy in YouTube says, usually verb is cancel for ending cruise control manually. User cancels cruise control. That's also a nice one, but maybe ended as well. But car detected in front is other cars around, because it's mostly about the one in front of you.
So what might be the word here? Cars detected nearby.
Or slower, because it's about a car that's driving slower, right?
Slower cars detected nearby.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is it. These are the 4 scenarios here.
Yeah, we might. Yeah, I think so as well for now. Maybe we'll figure more out later.
All right. So there's a lot of complexity we could jump into here, but for the purpose of this workshop, I think we should move to the bounded context. Let's jump into the solution space now, and we can come back to the problem space if needed.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm looking at the problem space. We don't have a lot of complexity in the domain here. I'm leaning towards creating maybe just a message flow diagram here like this, because it seems like it should be simple.
Yeah. Yeah, either that or the UML one. But
yeah,
I would go for this one because I think yours is based on domain storytelling, right? This flow. It's kind of based on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's based on domain storytelling.
And it reminds me a bit about the UML diagrams, but then in a more domain-y way and in a more flexible way, right? So I enjoyed that one for these kind of cases. Because EventStorming is really, and that's the case I was making, right? EventStorming is a flow which you go through from left to right. And you're already seeing that there's a lot happening at one point. So then something like this would help me more, I think.
Yeah, so my heuristic here is there's not much flow here. There's not a long conversation involving lots of back and forth communication. So it seems like this can summarize everything. Yeah, hopefully we'll discover that this doesn't summarize things, and we'll realize we'll have to jump back into the problem space.
Yeah.
And
You
this
guys,
is
could I ask a quick question?
yeah.
Yeah.
So as a beginner, I'm just trying to get my bearings here. Is what you did in, excuse me, when you were exploring the problem space, I think you were calling that the user journey, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
And is that sort of a simplistic event storm that you used for that, or is that unrelated to the event storming technique? It seems like those are events in the orange, right?
Yeah, very high level events in the domain.
Yeah. So it's that this technique is a bit similar as you would probably might also do in user story mapping, for instance, right? You start with either commands or events. I like events more. But yeah, this is how I usually start. Well, if you only have one domain expert, this is that's a heuristic I think Christina made up as well. And it's also from user story mapping, right? If you only have one domain expert, let the domain expert speak, and you just map out these events, what you hear. And then at some point, what Nick is now doing, oh, maybe this helps more. Let's do it. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I got you. Thank you.
And that's why I believe if you have this toolbox, right? Niket, you wanted to say something or not?
Yeah. So what I want to know is
I'm not hearing you correctly, unfortunately. Is that only for me?
Yeah, I don't hear the sound either.
No, your sound is
check my-
robotically.
yeah, let me-
Maybe write in chat if you can. So what I was about to say is I don't believe in one tool. I believe you should pick the tool that comes in. I like to start with event storming, and as we did now, just with events, laying them down. And then when you get the experience, you'll notice, maybe I need example mapping now. Maybe I need this flow modeling right now. Maybe I need big picture event storming or wordly mapping. There's the whole toolbox that you can use, and pick one. Start exploring. My advice will also be always learn event storming because it has the best hit ratio. But as you can see here, it won't help you at this certain modeling. And then you just switch to the other one. Just try out as many as you can, experiment with them and see what fits you the most and the best. That's the most interesting part.
Am I audible now? Proper?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So one thing I want to know that can I duplicate the events over here? For example, when slower car detected nearby, it is also possible that afterwards we need to end at the cruise control or something like that, or it will actually, increase the complexity of the system. So
yeah. So I have a heuristic, which is whenever you see the same event, which can happen in multiple places, always qualify it. So for me, I would have here cruise control ended due to slower cars. Cruise control ended due to journey ending. And then we might find a better name for those, like cruise control ended because we detected slower cars nearby. That might be cruise control shut off or something. There might be a special name for it. Like, okay. Oh yeah, when we end the cruise control because there's a car nearby, that might be called a collision prevented or something like that.
Okay. Clear.
So yeah, I would always duplicate it and then look to try and qualify it and then find a better name for each event.
Nice.
That's a lot easier in Mural. Duplicating.
I actually had a small question, if you don't mind. So we should consider this one is like a very small but big picture event storming, right?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the scope of the workshop, but looking at these events, I think there's probably a lot of stuff going on in here that we haven't modeled. So cruise control speed sets. There's a bunch of stuff going on there inside the system to set the speed. Like these events here are mostly just like the user facing things that the user sees. But when you set the cruise control, that needs to control some internal electronics. Are we modeling that here, or is that outside of the scope?
I mean, right here, it's probably outside of the scope.
Probably for this one, yeah, but maybe there are other scenarios.
I mean, all of them looks like something that the user will notice or face, like whether the car speed was adjusted or the emergency brake was activated, right?
Yeah, and what we're lacking here is a couple of things. So why is the user setting the speed control? That could be important. That might give us different insights. And what are they setting the speed to? And what is the current state of the world? So it might be user is setting cruise control because they just got on the motorway and they're setting it to the maximum motorway speed limit. Okay. We've got like, oh, sorry. The motorway in the UK is like the, what do you call it? Like the fastest road, the biggest roads where you can drive the fastest with 3 lanes, let's say. But maybe there's another reason for setting the speed control. Maybe it's on a smaller road, for example, and they're setting it to a lower speed. And maybe it's like first time user setting the speed control. The first time user setting the cruise control speed. Like all of these different reasons for doing this might yield different insights and have different events that come after it. So to me, this is like super high level. This is about as high level as you can get, really. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. Like what was the user doing before they did this? So yeah, super high level, I would say.
Okay, so I actually wanted to continue with asking whether we can just try to use other event storming types, like the design level event storming or value-driven event storming, to instead of using some other technique here to model then commands, I don't know, aggregates, projections, etc.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's do the next 5 minutes of mobbing. We'll try and use event storming here.
It was just a question, but okay.
Actually, let's do 5 more minutes on this technique and finish this one, and then we'll compare by doing 5 minutes on the event storming to we'll have 2 things to compare. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay, Kenny, so when the EV driver or the commuter I put here, when they set the cruise control, what system do they talk to? Is there like a UI in the car, like a cruise?
Yeah, it's a physical. It's a physical on your steering wheel. There are some buttons on your steering wheel.
Okay.
So steer wheel buttons or something.
Yeah. Okay. Steering wheel button. Let's go with that.
Yeah. Or how do you say it? Yeah, that's fine.
We switch or something?
Sorry?
Maybe switch or something? Isn't it called a switch? Like where you put up,
on the
down?
new ones, you just have buttons where you say on or off or.
Okay, my car's old.
There's some form of just like a PlayStation 4 controller or a Switch controller, right? Something like that.
Ah, nice.
A joy.
Joystick.
So does the user specify the speed here, or how is the speed worked out?
So the speed you set based on your current speed, and then you can adjust it.
Okay, so we have the current speed plus an adjustment, let's say.
Yeah,
You might also set it via voice.
Oh,
Yeah, I never tried that.
exciting. Okay. Voice control, let's put that for now. So,
okay, whereas typically you would just push a button. But I would say the future, you might just say, hey car, put me to 100 kilometers, or maybe put me to max speed, or you don't know, you didn't see it, but your car did, and you just say, go the fastest as possible. Just
cool.
throwing ideas here.
So then this control unit inside the car, this just takes the information from the user. It's just the interface at this point. It doesn't contain any business rules or logic. Then we have some kind of custom code to process this request. So this is our first bounded context. What do we call this?
That bounded context would be, well, let's just call it the cruise control service.
Cruise control service sounds a bit generic, but let's go with that.
Yeah.
We can, if this technique will show us if it's doing too many things.
Yeah, it probably is for now, but yeah.
Okay. So then basically the UI is basically just forwarding that command, right? It's just forwarding what the user's done to the actual business logic here.
No, yeah, eventually it will send probably to the, I think to a system called the engine, I guess, right?
Yeah, it needs to control
the engine.
Okay, let's say engine management, engine service, something generic. Yeah. Engine, let's put engine service for now.
Electrical engine, yeah, something like that.
All right, okay. So what's going on in here then? Is this another command here? What's this?
The other one is set adjust speed, I guess.
Okay, so the engine service knows nothing about cruise control, right?
No. So it just wants to adjust speed.
Adjust speed, and in here we just have the new speed, I guess.
Yeah.
Speed.
So now becomes the interesting question, right? So normally the engine servers will also react on my gas pedal in this case.
Maybe the engine service would accelerate.
Yeah, would it be, so I would guess, because with an electrical, will it accelerate, or will you just say to the engine service, but now we're going to get into God clause or not, right? Will you say to the engine service, go to this speed, or would you say, okay, increase speed, and then when it doesn't have to increase speed anymore, you just say, no, not increase speed?
So feedback loop kind of thing, right? I mean, what you're saying is that
it depends on if the cruise control service says something, it might be different. The adjustment of the speed might be different. Let's say, quote unquote, faster or slower than if you would push a pedal with your feet, right? If you want to go really fast up to a certain speed, and then you would accelerate faster. Maybe that's too deep here, but just wanted to mention it.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Niket, you wanted to say something as well?
I'm saying that basically the idea of cruise control service making sense if it takes the decision. What I'm trying to say, if we are just sending a command to adjust the speed to particular number to engine service directly, then potentially cruise service service doesn't have the control. So what I'm trying to say, engine service should have increase or decrease kind of commands. Handle the command of increase the speed or decrease the speed, and then it will also notify the current speed to the cruise control service, and cruise control service should do the speed adjustment? I mean, by adjusting the commands continuously.
Don't we have a race condition there? Like if the cruise control says the current speed's 50, I want to get to 70, increase it by 20, but in the time frame between the cruise control doing that and the message being received by the engine service, the user puts their foot down and the user's going to 70, the engine will now say, oh, I'm at 70. The cruise control is asking me to go to 90.
But then my question is that when person put the pedal at that time, the event which was there, that means the loop will be sorry, just a second. Isn't it is as good as user ended the cruise control? I mean, I'm just asking. So if we put cruise control afterwards, can user put the pedal? Or if he puts that, isn't it the means that it is as good as cruise control is ended? Asking, can he? I mean,
yeah. So does putting the foot down deactivate the cruise control? Good question.
So here we're coming into the solution space, right?
Yeah, I would say if you put the foot down on the brake, it cancels cruise control. But if you accelerate, it kind of just overrides. I mean, that at least that's what I experienced in cars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Until
so for me as a user, I don't care. I just want it at that cruise speed, and the rest I don't care about. Right? That's my user perception. So how it does it, I don't care.
Yeah, typically. But let's imagine you're at 50, you're entering the motor road, and you said, go to 100, and it does it like the acceleration, let's say in a relaxed way, in a relaxed fashion. But then you realize, there's someone like very fast approaching behind me, and I need to speed up very quickly. Then you push your foot on the pedal just to go faster to the 100 to exit this dangerous situation. Then you lift it again, and still cruise control is on, should be on, because that's what you're used to from typical cruise control systems in the low mid-range.
Yeah,
like
so you can always go faster. I can put my foot down and I can go faster than the set cruise control.
Exactly, like the acceleration that was anticipated by the cruise control service.
Yeah, so it will just do a basic acceleration, but I can put my gas on the pedal and I can go faster. So there's this other thing that the EV commuter can do, and that's use the pedal and also control the engine surface. And
that's just what I wanted to say. Maybe the wording, just speed, maybe is not as good as actually cruise control would say accelerate in a certain fashion. And a different system, let's say the foot pedal, would also say accelerate in a specific way, like accelerate faster, or it might be different. But the engine service would just take in, how fast should I accelerate, or effectively how much gas do I put in the cylinders to burn or something, because that results in a certain acceleration. So the question is, isn't it the acceleration that the engine service accepts instead of go to a different speed? Because how is the engine service supposed to know what acceleration to go to that set speed?
So I'm just, Nick, adding the other one here as well to make it a bit more clear, perhaps. So making it more explicit. Fine. So you have the speed pedal that also controls the engine surface, right? That should be separate or not. That's what you're saying as well, Andreas and Nick, both of you.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's a good question now. So does the engine service have an open host service, which is a standard interface, which both of those things use? So are they both calling, let's say,
the question is it drive-by-wire, so to say? I mean, it's not a physical wire anymore. It's all just commands, right? And like received by engine electronics these days. Whereas back then it was really a physical cable that you adjusted the gas that was put into the motor.
So I have one question. You said that, I mean, the cruise control limit was 100 kilometer. Now, means driver actually use the pedal and it goes to 120 via manual speed pedal.
Yeah.
So afterwards, means eventually it will be down to 100 because cruise control was 100, or once that limit will be crossed, it will be higher only. I mean, 120 only.
Can I quickly go meta here and just put on my modeling hat? So what I'm seeing here is that we modeled out the problem space and it looked very simple. We've jumped into the solution space, which forces us to be more precise, thinking about how can we build something that runs in software. And suddenly we've uncovered lots of edge cases. So my feeling here is that we should be drifting more back towards the problem space to cover these different flows. So one scenario is puts on cruise control, cruise control set. But then we have this other scenario where cruise control is activated, driver puts their foot on the pedal. We've got different scenarios here. And that's probably worth modeling these in the problem space first and then coming back over to here. I think we're pretty much out of time now anyway. We've got like 15 minutes left. So yeah, I think we can stop the mobbing. But they were good questions. And when we were saying earlier, are these events too high level? Well, we proved it by jumping to the solution space that these were definitely too high level.
And this is when you this relates to something I always use from Eric Evans, is the modeling whirlpool. Not sure if you ever heard of it. I'll put it up the Mural board. Put it under where we were working. So what we just did, just for people who are a bit new to this is also always a bit of my reference as well for people entering the DDD scene, is that what we did was tell a story, try to be concrete and specific, walk through, flesh out, refocus on hard part, refocus on core domain. Forget that now, that's not what we did here. But we told a story, we tried to be concrete and precise, right, with the scenarios. Yeah. Then we went on proposing a model, and then we gained new insight. And what you're now proposing, Nick, is, okay, maybe we should go back and tell that story again. And that's the whirlpool coming in here. I've written my side of it with EventStorming and example mapping, but there's tons of information going into this. You can do it with any modeling or any visual tool or non-visual tool. But this is what actually, for people who are novel or new to DDD, this is actually a really nice thing that we're doing. We're just going through scenarios, going back and forth from problem to solution space. And that's I like about Miro, by the way, because it's an infinite board. Now you can just go back, use another scenario underneath and propose a new model, and you just let it be there and delete it later on when you don't need it anymore. It's a lot easier in Miro than if you do it physically, where people don't tend to duplicate or try to, right? It's more sunk cost fallacy in physical than there is on a Mural board, I feel.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, definitely. I would also say so.
Yeah.
Anyways, we've got 10 minutes left, so I guess we can return to those questions and any other questions and then close things out.
Yeah, who has questions? So let's see.
I was just going to suggest actually as well, there's another tool that would be quite useful here for the main message flow, which would be wps.de/modeler. Have you come across that tool? Typically used for domain storytelling.
Yeah, the domain storytelling people. No, I've not used their tool actually.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, obviously it might be useful for this as well, because you can upload the icons to it as well, and you can do replay, so you can actually tell the story in a sequence of interactions.
That would be useful. I guess that can manage some of the layout for you as well, some of the accidental complexity.
Yeah, I've put it here. And I'll put it in the YouTube channel as well, so that
you've done it. Wow, you've done it already. You beat me to it. Cool.
Yeah. A thing here for people is what we started out is also mapping these tools on a lean pub, mapping the community tools on a lean pub, and maybe that's interesting for people as well to read up on. So it's the visual collaboration book. Any more questions? I think I see a few more messages. Yeah, and it felt a good case for example mapping. Yeah, I wanted to jump into example mapping a few times myself, being a fan of it, of the tool.
Yeah, I think that's what I was leaning to here. When I see cruise control speed set, that's a very cruddy. I'm changing the value of some data. Whenever I see something like that, I'm always thinking, why are you changing the data, and what value are you changing it to? Like, what happens if I set the cruise control to 0? What happens if I set the cruise control to like 500? Like exploring these different values will lead to different outcomes.
So actually I've driven a couple of cars with adaptive cruise control, and I've experimented with it. So I actually trying to re-engineer the requirements. So actually a thing I figured out is when you run up against a car and you slow down, the minute you put your lights to the left, because in most of Europe we drive on the right? So going left is you want to pass someone, then it will increase its speed automatically. That's actually one thing I figured out and I didn't know. And I can imagine people that don't know and are driving behind a person, putting their lights to the left and suddenly the car increases. That's a bit scary. So these are all the things I tried out. I haven't tried the emergency brake yet. I was too scared.
I have one question, Niket this side. So when we do big picture event storming, so from that, if we want to identify bounded context, should we do it by grouping of events or things like that, or bounded context should be identified independently only? I mean, so basically the question is that does big picture event storming help me to identify bounded context? And if yes, how?
Yeah, so it can help. And the common example you will see, could you get that picture from I'm going to get that picture from the meetup page very quickly.
Yeah, I have another one from Alberto.
Yeah, so in theory, you can take an event storm and you can organize each section into bounded context like this. In theory, you can do this, but a lot of domains I work in, life isn't so simple. Like you have things involving, like one bounded context can be happening in different places on the event storm.
So that's why Alberto calls it emergent, right? Just what you're saying, Nick. It's called emerging bounded context. So it's not a bounded context yet. It's like there's a possibility here. Is that what you mean there?
Could be, yeah. So it's definitely the possibility. But what I'm saying on this diagram here, some of these bubbles, it might be the same bounded context repeated multiple times. It might be a bounded context gets involved here and it gets involved here as well later in the process, like towards the start and towards the end. And
yeah, so for me, that would be a smell, usually.
Why is that? It's like everything goes through a life cycle, right? Like a user signs up, user does some stuff, a user might close their account.
Yeah, but if, at the start, it might be a smell because the pivotal event are mostly system boundaries already on a higher level. And going in, I might say there might be a different purpose on the right side than there is on the left side of the flow, because it's a different business phase.
Yeah, so but the thing is, business phases and capabilities are different things. A capability can support multiple business phases.
Yeah.
Like a bank account. I create a bank account, I put money in, I take money out, I put money in, I take money out, I close my bank account. Like that doesn't all happen in a nice little bubble in one place. There's other stuff happening between it. Like I might create a mortgage, open a bank account, put some money in, start a mortgage, close my bank account, do stuff to the mortgage. Like these things don't all happen in clusters. And it can be a smell, but it's also quite common in my experience. What happens is there's that paper from, I always forget the name of the paper, but it says when people try and take a process and they try and break each process into separate phases, you end up with coupling common elements that are used in multiple phases.
Yeah.
Was it the paper by?
I'm just looking for something really quick.
Is it the David Parnas paper?
Yeah, so here it depends. So this is a nice, this is always an interesting discussion that always keeps
this is the one
flowing around, right? So the thing to remember about a bounded context is that it's an implementation detail. It's in a tactical design pattern. So it's how we design it, right? And a big picture event storming is about the problem space. So that's why I think Alberto calls them emergent bounded contexts, where you say, well, here probably I want to start diving in and look for possible bounded contexts. But that's why all these tools help. What you just did, Nick, that's where I believe in, is you need several tools to especially at the start when you're novel, try different things out. Eric Evans always say, a model is not a model, at least try three different models and see how it feels, how it goes, how it's working.
Yeah, so if I go back to the bank account, if you were to model that process of creating an account, putting money in, taking money out, putting money in, taking money out, you would have a creation account, a depositing account, a creating an account bounded context, a depositing money bounded context, a withdrawing money bounded context, and a closing an account bounded context. Those are the 4 phases. But each of those 4 phases relies on the same bits of data. Yeah, the account balance, all of those things depend on that.
Yeah, so here on the bottom right side, you see the Alberto's interpretation of bounded contexts and business phases and business lines in his blog.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. So,
and that represents his big picture in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, so in this one, he doesn't have any context at cross phases.
No.
So everything is within one phase and it crosses business lines, but not phases.
Yeah.
If you read that Parnas paper, Parnas argues for the opposite. Says you should look for things that cross phases.
That happened in several phases. He talks about it as well in his thing. Great. I think we're out of time. Right?
Yeah, time's up now. I do need to leave as well soon. So
yeah, same here. So Nick, thank you. I hope people enjoyed today. If you want to get more knowledge in, we are remodeling the virtual DDD site. There's a learning subject that's heavily under construction, but it's already you can already start using it, and we're trying to create or curate contact there from, for instance, the DDD crew, which most of the resources come to, and just as a learning platform. So if you want to learn more, go to the site. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Nick, for facilitating today. You have, I really like your way of Miro wizardry. And I'm going to do a rain dance. Hopefully it will rain here as well. And hope to see everyone next time. So thank you very much.